Hi, and welcome to Stopping Opiate Addiction. I'm Teresa, and I'm going to tell you my story. My son used heroin for about 12 years. And during that 12 years, everything happened. The only thing that didn't happen is he didn't spend any real time in prison, which I'm very, very fortunate that didn't happen. But I'm going to tell you what did happen, because that's the only thing that didn't happen. But now I'm going to tell you what did happen. So I'll start from the beginning. When he started coming off of heroin, I wasn't aware that he was using heroin. We lived in New Jersey at the time, and they mix heroin with fentanyl, which makes it very, very, very difficult to come off of. Fentanyl is worse drug than heroin, if you can believe that. But that's what they mix the heroin with. And so when my son started coming off of it, he got very, very sick. And he was sick for about 4, maybe 5 days. And on the 5th day, I said, okay, I know that this is not a flu bug, so we're going to the doctor. Because at this point, he can't keep anything down. He's getting weaker. He's getting dehydrated. I can see it when I pinch his skin. It stays there. It's time to go to the doctor. So we got into the car and we went to the doctor with him holding a bucket for when he had to throw up. And he did. So when we got there, they took us in and they started him on IVs and gave him some medicine for the nausea that he was having. And he seemed to get better. But no one ever said anything about opiates or heroin or anything like that. Never, ever said anything. Even though they did a blood test, they did a urine test, they never said anything about it. Now, I know, as well as you do, that those drugs were still in his system. So that's a little confusing that they never said anything. What they did say is that there was a hospital in another town that could help him more than they could. And they suggested that we take him the following day to this other hospital. So we did. His father showed up, which we weren't going through a divorce. We were already divorced by this point. And he showed up there, and they told both of us about this other hospital, and we agreed to meet there the next day as a designated time. So we went home, and the next day we got up and went to the other hospital in the other town. When we got there, they didn't really want to talk to me or his father. They wanted to talk to him. He was 19, he was 18, and he was going to be turning 19. And so he went and talked to them, and then he came over and told us what they said. And he said something about opiates. I had no idea what opiates were at this time. And I said to him, "What's opiates?" And that's when he said the magic word of heroin. When he said that, I was confused. I felt fear. I was in disbelief. And I was really in shock that my son would say the word heroin and apply it to himself. Well, by this time, we were being called back into the room where the doctor was to see him. Now, since we had just found this out, I was like kind of freaking out. And I just needed some time to get away from this and just digest what I just heard. And so I left. And I walked as far as I could walk in the buildings. And I just sat down and I started to take all of it in, what I had just heard, and to process what I just heard. And I stayed there for about 20, 30 minutes, just processing and taking in what he had just told us. So I walked back to where they were, and I could see that my ex had been crying. My son wasn't crying at the time, but I could see that he was very upset. And that's when they both said that Alex needed to go into a rehab or something like that. And my ex said he would find one. Since the insurance was in his name, he would find one. And he would be in touch. And we left. And I went home with my now addict son, not really knowing what to do. I mean, what do you do on something like that? You don't really do anything. There's nothing you can do. So I went home, and my ex called and said that he found one. It was in Pennsylvania, and that we would have to wait, I think, about a week to 10 days to get him in there. And so I said to my son, okay, that's fine. But what you're going to do is you're going to stay in this room, which is a big room. It's like his room, and then there was a sitting area where they watch TV. I said, you're going to stay here until you have to go. Because it was my experience that he would just leave the house and go do what he was going to do. Now, during this time of 7 to 10 days, he did leave the house. Yep. And then he came back. But, when he came back, I know that he had heroin on him. It wasn't that he got in the car and drove. It was that they brought him the heroin. They met him somewhere and brought him the drugs. It's crazy. So, anyway, we ended up going to the rehab in Pennsylvania. And when we got there, it was in an old house. And they had added on, of course. And it was very, very nice. Beautiful gardens. It was nice. And it housed doctors that were addicted. It housed inmates that were sent to rehab. And it housed people like Alex who were private insurance clients. Alex enjoyed being there. He played his guitar. He learned to play his guitar with his roommate's help. He was roommated with a doctor. I went to every parent meeting there was. I wanted to learn as much as I could about this drug that he was on. And then it came for him to leave after 28, 30 days. And we came home. And this was the beginning of October. And by the end of October, he was using again. So my advice is, if you're going to send somebody to a 28, 30-day program, send him there so he can get, or she can get, a clear picture of where their life's going. But don't send them there thinking that they're going to be well, that they're going to be off of heroin, because they're not. No 30-day program, no 28-day program, no 21-day program is going to help them get off of heroin. It's not. So from there, I decided to move to California from New Jersey. Now, living in New Jersey is like one of the worst places to be for heroin addiction because of the fentanyl and heroin mixed together. Yes, that's true. But it's also one of the worst places to be just because it's a port city. It's so close to the ports and it's so easy to get. So what do? I moved to San Francisco. I put my house on the market, and just as my real estate lady is getting a offer and we're going through this whole process of the offer and what am I going to sell it for and all this, I am again putting my son into a rehab in a nearby town. And they don't really believe in insurance. This insurance company doesn't really believe that addicts need a 30-day program. So they put him in a program to detox him. And then they put him into a halfway house. This halfway house is for prisoners coming out of prison. Not jail, but prison. So we are talking hardcore criminals here. And this is where they put addicts, with hardcore criminals. Need I say more about that? So he's taken there, and from there they put him on to a flight to go to California to live in a sober living home. And meanwhile, I sell my house, I pack everything up, and I move to California, to the San Francisco Bay Area. And he goes to San Jose, which is in the Bay Area because San Francisco and San Jose are very, very close, and it's just like one big city. So he goes to San Jose, and I go to San Francisco. I'm outside of San Francisco in a town called Walnut Creek. So from there, he stays in the sober living home for 18 months. And then he wants to get out, which I understand most people do. And from there, he moves in with a guy who was in the sober living home and who owns restaurants. And he has a house. And he asked Alex if he'd like to come live with him. And of course, that's where Alex goes to live. Now, when Alex gets there, it's not that he's not doing well. He was doing well in the sober living. He was going to school and he had a job. And he now has a job working for this guy because this guy has restaurants. And he's doing well. He's still going to school. He's still working. But the house was not really clean. The guy had dogs in there, and the house was not really clean. So he decides to move to a different place. So this place that he moves, there's 3 guys that live in the house. One commutes from Sacramento to San Jose, and one has a relationship, so he's not there a lot. And then there's Alex. And Alex did okay at this facility too. This is not a sober living. It didn't have anything to do with it. They don't even know his history. And during this period of time, Alex meets a girl again. He meets another girl. And unbeknownst to me, he starts using again. And he ends up in San Jose hospital because he's gotten some bad stuff, some bad heroin. So, and it's affected his pancreas, which he had that when we were in New Jersey. He was in the hospital for pancreatitis also. So he has this again. So from there, he gets out, and now he's graduated from college, and he's ready to go to the university. And he's going to go to San Francisco University. So he decides that he needs to find a new place to live in San Francisco. Can't drive back and forth from San Jose to San Francisco. Okay? So he does. And it's a nice enough house. It's nice. It's in San Francisco. And he goes to school maybe 1 month. Maybe. And he's back into drugs. And he's heavily into drugs. And so he drops out. And he got his tuition paid for the first semester, and then for the second semester also. So, but he didn't go to school. So he now has that to pay back. From there, he went into a rehab, and he went into multiple rehabs. And most of the rehabs that he went into, he had been in like 2 times. And that's kind of unusual because unless you're a really good patient, you follow the rules, you do what's expected of you, they won't let you back in. So I guess that's kind of a good thing that he was able to go twice to them, sometimes even 3 times. Because it shows that he was cooperative. And so he was in some rehabs where he slept on the floor on a pallet, and that's where they stayed while they were going through detox. And then they went over to this other building that they were in, and it was basically a room with a bed and some chairs in front of a TV, and that's basically the place. If they were lucky enough to have a meeting, you all are familiar with the meetings, a meeting there that night or any other night, then they attended that. Otherwise, they didn't. It was not a nice place. Quite a difference from Pennsylvania, which was very nice. He's been in places that have been in hospitals, and those are more geared towards giving out medication and that type of thing to help you through. And then he's been in places that are more like for just detox again, and they don't really have the rehab part. So they put you in detox, and you're there for a week or a little over a week, 10 days maybe, and then they let you out. So he's been in all of it. He's done it all. He's met a lot of nice people in them. And in every place that he was at, I always attended the parents' programs. I was always there. I always supported him. I always told him that I loved him. I always told him that I was proud of him for going into a rehab and going through detox, because that's not an easy process for them to go through. And this is really a process. It's not a process just for the addict. It's a process for the whole family to go through. But being a single parent, it was tough. It was tough. I had my other 2 children there, and they helped me to support Alex, but it was primarily on me to do this. My ex-husband wasn't in the picture. He stayed in New Jersey and worked, and he was remarried by this time anyway, so it didn't really matter. But it was tough on me to go through this and to deal with this for 12 years, as I'm sure that you understand this, because whether or not you're dealing with it for 3 years, 6 years, it doesn't really matter. It's all the same. It's a living hell. I remember one time that he was in our house and he grabbed a kitchen knife and he was coming after my other son with it. And before that, him and his girlfriend had had a fight, and she had called the police unbeknownst to me, and they showed up at my house and took him away into a 5051 facility. 5051, as you well know, is when I kind of look at it, it's like it's a way for them to cool off. So it gives them a period of time to cool off. That's what I look at it as. It's not something I want to do very often because it does create a record for them. But occasionally, when they're using drugs and they've been using it for long periods of time, and you have somebody wielding a knife, you have to do something drastic. I also remember he got in a fight one time and got his jaw broke. And I was called at like 5 o'clock in the morning and told from the hospital in San Francisco. And that was not good either. When I brought him home, of course, he left shortly after that. As soon as he got sober enough is basically when it happened. He got a infection in his hand right here. And he spent about 7 to 10 days in the hospital. And because they couldn't find an antibiotic to work on it, so they called in an infectious disease doctor. And he had 4 antibiotics that the hospital didn't have. And so he tried 2 of them and they didn't work. And so he had 2 more left, and one of those worked. So his hand was saved. But unfortunately, they put a PICC line in him, which is a basically like a tube into your arm, and it goes directly to your heart up. And they put the medicine in through this tube. Well, you can guess that he couldn't wait to get out of there to use that for his own pleasure. And he did. As soon as he got out of the hospital, he was gone. He did come back, though, because they continued to put medicine into that tube on an outpatient basis. Not to mention he had to get the tube out at some point. So he did come back for that. But he also did use it for his own pleasure, which could have killed him. He also lived in these hotels, or motels, I should say, not hotels, motels that you rent for an hour, and you pay by the hour. And he would sleep in those. And he got bedbug bites. And when he got bedbug bites, they got sepsis. And he had to walk to the doctor and get shots every day. And he said that that was the most painful thing that he's ever been through. Now, this is coming from a kid who has no problem with needles at all. Doesn't care where you put him. He doesn't care. So if he says it's painful, you can bet it was painful. One time he overdosed. He overdosed about 10 times, really. But the one time I'm thinking about he was, I woke up, and in California, you usually have your windows and doors open because it's not hot there, and it's not that cold. So you usually sleep with them open. So I woke up and I went to sit in the family room, and I was looking at him because he was in one of his drugged out positions, and I kept hearing this cat coughing. And I got up and I went and I looked for the cat, and I didn't see the cat anywhere. And then I realized that that cat coughing was coming from my son. And I went over there and I looked at him, and he was gray. And let me just tell you, when I went over there and looked at him, at that very moment, I could have just slapped the crap out of his face. That's what I wanted to do so bad. But at the same time, when I saw that he was gray and I heard that cough, it was not really a cough, but that's the best way I can describe it. I knew that he was in trouble. So I called 911, and they came, and they saw him in the chair, and they tried to wake him up, and of course there's no response. So they put him on the ground. And from the ground, they started working on him, putting an IV in, this kind of stuff. And there was still no response. They gave him the shots in the leg, no response. So they picked him up and they put him back into the ambulance, in the back of the ambulance. Closed the doors and started working on him for about 20 minutes before they left. I don't know what they were doing. Have no idea. And then they took him to the hospital, and we followed. And it was me and my other son and my daughter. When we got there, we didn't know if he was awake, if he was dead, or what. We had no idea what was his condition was. So it took about an hour to an hour and a half for them to tell us that he was alive and that we could go back there and see him. So we did. And when we went back there, what we noticed, the first thing is that the nurse was coming in and rubbing his chest really hard to keep him breathing because he would stop breathing. He did not know that we were there. He was totally out of it. And he says that he only remembers the lights of the ceiling. He only remembers that, looking up and seeing them. And they say usually when they give those shots to people, they come out and they can be violent and all this. Didn't happen for him. The doctor came in and he told me that he had had a lot of friends who were heroin addicts, and all of them were dead. And that his best advice to me was to go out and to buy a plot of land for his grave. That was his best advice. And I thought to myself, no, that's your story, that's not mine, and mine's not going to end up like that. So a couple of days later, we took Alex to the rehab because that day that he overdosed, he was scheduled to go into rehab, which is very typical, they say. I've always heard that on the day that they're supposed to go in, a lot of times they overdose. Typical. So he went there, and probably for about a week, he was high for about a week. And then the last 3 weeks, he wasn't as high. And that's when my ex flew to California, and he went into, we had a meeting with the psychologist at the rehab. And, the problem with the short-term rehabs is you can't get into anything big. And one of the big things that was bothering my son was that his father had had an affair before we were divorced. And he had brought my son, Alex, into that affair. And then he had lied to him about it. And I knew that Alex had a big problem with that. I knew that that was really what Alex was running away from and trying to hide from. But I also knew that there was nothing that I could do about that. I knew that that had to be handled between Alex and his dad. So Alex tried to talk to him about it a little bit. But it didn't really work because, rehabs are such short term, and you got an hour, and it's really difficult to get into really serious things. So that was kind of a failure. Plus the fact my ex doesn't really want to address that either. He doesn't want to hear what he's done wrong. And I understand that because people don't like to face what they've done wrong. Now, addicts usually hide by doing the drugs. They run away from what they're trying to hide from. And I understand that. Their worlds become overwhelmed and they don't understand it. They feel alone. They isolate. They're afraid. They steal. And Alex has stolen, you name it, he's stolen it. Money, credit cards, cash, of course checks, jewelry, anything that you can imagine, he's stolen. I've heard about kids stealing CD collections. I've heard about kids stealing doll collections. And these are things that their parents have bought that they've stolen. I've heard about kids stealing DVD collections and cashing them in. Anything that kids think that they can get some money for, they'll take. So my best advice to you on that is to either get rid of it, as in putting it in a safety deposit box, or go out, buy a big safe, a big one that people can't lift, and put your stuff in that. Because otherwise, they're going to steal it. So I think that the best thing that we can all do is to slowly introduce the concept of getting off of drugs, because I know that my son has said that after 2 years, there's nobody that doesn't want to be off of it. No one. They're tired of being ruled by something that they can't control. So I know that everyone wants to be off of drugs. And the way to do that is to slowly, very slowly, introduce Suboxone. Now, the way that Suboxone came into my life is that Alex heard about it at a rehab, I think. It was mentioned. And he started looking it up. And it took him about 6 months, maybe a year, to get everything in order, the insurance that he needed to get, the prescription coverage that he needed to get, to find a doctor, because he did all of this while he was still getting high. So he would come home and he would get on the computer and look for what he needed to get this. Then he would get high. Then he would come back, get high. It was a constant battle with that. And so he eventually, finally, got everything together and decided, I'm going to see a doctor to get myself onto this Suboxone. Now, the type of doctors that you go to see to get on Suboxone is a psychiatrist, or it's a pain wellness physician. Actually, it's a pain management doctor. That's what it is, pain management doctor. A psychiatrist or a pain management specialist. So either one of those will give you Suboxone. Now, when my son got on Suboxone, he was on Suboxone for about 2, maybe 3 years when we were in California. And he did hold a job. And then he got fired. The problem with him being on the Suboxone is that he would get off of the Suboxone, use heroin, get back on Suboxone, get off Suboxone, use heroin, get back on Suboxone, and it was just a repetitive cycle. And one of the problems with that was that he had a girlfriend that he had met in rehab who was very, very much involved in this whole process. She was using heroin with him, which is a good and a bad thing. Good in the fact that she never let him overdose. Bad in the fact that he's got a partner now. So someone to encourage him. During that period of time, he crashed 2 or 3 vehicles that were hers. Totaled them. Yeah. And it was just a really, really rough time. And then I had an opportunity to move to Texas. Now, I know that I'm not like a lot of you. I've spent my whole life moving. And I've lived in Texas many, many times. So I had no problem moving back to Texas. I was going to take him too, of course. I wasn't going to leave him in California. Even though he's 30 years old. I'm not going to leave him in California. So he has the Suboxone. And we load up, and I'm not sure if he's going to be there that day, but I'm pretty sure that he's going to move with us. I'm pretty sure he's going to go with us. So we load up, and he shows up the day that we're going to leave. And I know that he's got heroin. I know that he does. My other son knows that he does. But we're driving 2 cars, and he rides with me. And he sleeps the entire time for 2 days. He's on heroin. So we get here, And he no longer has access to heroin. He has to take the Suboxone. He finds a doctor who prescribes Suboxone for him. And he's on it and has been on it for 3 years now. And he's doing really, really well. Really well. So my advice to you is to slowly get your child on Suboxone. You introduce it very slowly. You do not push it on them. You make it be their idea. Because once they're on this, they'll see that they can live a normal life. Because they only want to be normal again. They do. Even though they may not act like it right now, they do. So that's pretty much my story. That's pretty much how it went with me. And I hope that you take my advice and get your child on Suboxone. I know that it will help them. I know that they can get off of opiates then. Whether or not they're doing prescription opiates or they're doing street opiates, I know that they can get off of it. It's not like, oh, there's another drug out there. I can't even remember. It starts with an M. But it's not like that. It's not like methadone. My son took methadone too, and he really couldn't function. So it's not like methadone. It's totally different. It makes them normal because heroin messes with the brain. It creates holes, if you will, in the brain. And Suboxone helps to fill those holes, if you will. So I hope this helps. And I hope you take my advice because this saved my son's life. And my son is now a productive citizen. He's thriving, he's moving forward, and he's doing really, really well. Of course, he would like to do better, but that's how addicts are. They always put a lot of pressure on themselves to do better. But he's doing well. He's doing well. And I know that your child can do well too. So until we meet again, I want you as a parent to take care of yourself. Make yourself a priority. You can't go and live next door to them in the sober living environment. But what you can do is take care of yourself, because this life is about you. Their life is about them, and you have to support them. And if you don't take care of yourself, you can't support them. And I know that you think that I'm kidding then, but it's true. Please take care of yourself. Do something nice. Take a bath. Drink a glass of wine. Take care of yourself. Until we meet again, I'm Teresa, and this is Stopping Opiate Addiction.